Did you find any of that fame difficult at all?
No, I mean, I think people come up to me all the time, and they say, we love the show, and I just thank them for it.
The new Yankee Workshop didn't end because it failed. It ended while people were still watching. For over 2 decades, Norm Abram built a loyal following through the new Yankee Workshop, turning simple materials into craftsmanship millions admired. But in 2009, the show suddenly ended, without the kind of explanation fans expected. So why did the new Yankee Workshop really come to an end? And what was happening behind the scenes when it all stopped? Join us as we reveal the real reason the new Yankee Workshop ended. The man before the camera ever found him. Norm Abram was just a kid from Milford, Massachusetts, following his father around job sites with a hammer and a willingness to learn whatever the next task required. He was just 9 years old when he began helping his father install hardwood floors at clients' homes. He absorbed the practical knowledge of the trade through hands-on experience rather than a classroom or textbook. He continued working alongside his father through high school summers and college vacations, building the kind of deep, intuitive understanding of wood and tools that only comes from years of doing it with your hands. But his fascination with the craft didn't end there. He went to the University of Massachusetts Amherst with the plan to initially study mechanical engineering, but along the line, he switched to business administration. But the academic track never grabbed him with the same force as carpentry. After graduating, he spent 3 years working as a site supervisor for a large construction firm in New England, managing projects and learning what happens when planning meets the realities of an actual job site. Then, in 1976, Norm made a decision that changed his life forever. He went out on his own and founded Integrated Structures, Inc., a general contracting firm that focuses on renovating and building custom homes in the Massachusetts area. The work was honest and of exceptional quality, and it was that quality that changed everything about the direction his life was taking. In 1979, he took a job building a small barn in the backyard of a television producer named Russell Marash, who was already well known in public television circles for having produced Julia Child's cooking program, The French Chef, for WGBH-TV in Boston. Russell was immediately struck by something specific about how Norm worked. He had the smallest scrap pile Marash had ever seen, which is the kind of detail that only registers as significant to someone who deeply understands the difference between efficient craftsmanship and sloppy workmanship. That tiny scrap pile was the first domino in a chain that would eventually produce more than 40 years of television. Russell invited Norm to help with the renovation of a rundown Victorian house in Boston's Dorchester neighborhood and brought a WGBH camera crew to record the process. That project became the first This Old House, which launched in February 1979, with Bob Villa as host and Norm Abram as the master carpenter. The show was an immediate success, and Norm became the technically brilliant backbone of a program that millions of people across the country began building their weekend mornings around. He was never the flashy one. He was never the host who cracked jokes or milked the camera for personality moments. He was the man who knew exactly what he was doing and communicated that knowledge so clearly and so patiently that people who had never touched a saw in their lives walked away from each episode feeling like they could actually build the thing they had just watched being built. That specific quality, the ability to make expertise feel accessible without dumbing it down, is what made Norm Abram impossible to replace. And it was what made the idea of his own show feel like an inevitability once Russell and WGBH began seriously considering it. But before the new Yankee Workshop could become the show that millions of people loved, it had to become something that barely anyone knew how to make. And the way it started was about as low-key and practical as the man at the center of it. How the workshop actually came together. The origin story of the new Yankee Workshop is the kind of thing that would never get approved in a modern television pitch meeting because it contains almost none of the elements that modern television development considers essential. There was no elaborate set built from scratch with a production budget, just Russell Marash, Norm Abram, an existing small building in Russell's own backyard, and a decision that the whole thing should be as real and as practical as the man they were building it around. In 1988, Russell decided to spin off from this old house and create a new series specifically focused on woodworking and furniture making. The filming location they chose was the small workshop in the barn that Norm had built in Russell's backyard back in 1979, the same building that had been the starting point of their entire professional relationship. They expanded the shop's layout and equipped it according to Norm's specific preferences, creating a 936-square-foot workspace that felt like a real working shop because it was one. The famous sliding barn door viewers saw open and close at the start and end of every episode faced west. The back bench and drill press ran along the west wall. The table saw sat in the center of the space. None of it was theatrical. All of it was genuinely functional. The new Yankee Workshop first aired in 1989 with a format that was almost aggressively straightforward. Norm Abram would build something. He would show you exactly how he was doing it and why. And at the end, you would have watched a complete project come together from raw wood to a finished piece. No drama, no conflict, no manufactured tension between cast members, no prizes, and no judges. Just a man doing careful, skilled work and explaining it clearly enough that the person watching could follow along. What most viewers did not know, and what the 30-minute format made easy to forget, is how much work was actually happening around each episode they sat down to watch. Each project that appeared to resolve neatly in a single episode actually required up to 60 hours of preparation and filming time. And Norm did all of the actual woodworking himself, not with the help of a shop team who cleaned up his mistakes before the camera rolled. During production seasons, Norm worked 40 to 60 hours a week on the show, meaning the quiet, unhurried man audiences watched on television was, in reality, maintaining a full-time professional workload that never slowed. The shop was not in Norm's backyard, as the show's visual presentation implied. It was in Russell's backyard, on Russell's property. That small piece of information is interesting because it captures something about the nature of the whole enterprise. It was always a production shaped by Russell Marash's creative vision and Norm Abram's technical authority, built in a space that both of them had a history with, and designed to look and feel like the natural habitat of the man at the center of it. It worked because it was almost true. The shop was real. The work was real. The man was real. The address was the one detail the audience was gently not told. Over 21 seasons, Norm built approximately 235 distinct projects on camera, ranging from simple workshop accessories to complex reproductions of antique furniture and outdoor structures, including a gazebo, a shed, a greenhouse, and even a sailing boat. The variety was genuine, and the craftsmanship was consistently at the level that made woodworkers who knew what they were looking at stop and actually pay attention to his technique. But the cumulative physical demand of all of that work, done on a concrete floor in a 936-square-foot shop over the course of 2 decades, was building towards something that the cheerful, calm television format never gave the audience a reason to think about. And when it finally became impossible to ignore, the decision to stop did not come from the network, from falling ratings, or from a financial argument. It came from one man looking at what his body was telling him and deciding that after 20 years of this, the message was worth listening to. What the show was actually costing him. The official announcement of the show's end came on October 16, 2009, when WGBH Boston stated that no further episodes of the new Yankee Workshop would be produced. The announcement was brief, professional, and notably quiet, given how significant the show was to the audience that had built its relationship with woodworking largely by watching Norm Abram do it week after week for 20 years. The fan response was immediate and overwhelmingly emotional. Woodworking forums and fan communities were filled with messages reflecting genuine personal loss. People writing that they had learned to build furniture because of this show, and that they had spent their weekends in their own shops because watching Norm made it feel possible. Russell Marash, the executive producer and director of the show, explained the decision plainly when he spoke to Woodworking magazine after the announcement. He said that Norm had been doing this for 20 years and thought it was time to step back and do a little less, and that because the show was so tied to him specifically, the production company did not want to replace him with a new host. Russell was direct about that last point. Comparisons between Norm and any successor would be inevitable, and those comparisons would not serve the new host or the audience well. The show existed because of Norm Abram, in a way that made it essentially impossible to continue without him. There was no version of the new Yankee Workshop that was not also Norm Abram's show. But the official language of stepping back and doing a little less is the polished version of a physical reality that was considerably more demanding. By the time Norm ended the show, he was approaching 60 years old and had spent 2 decades doing intensive hands-on woodworking on a concrete floor, filming long production days that bore very little resemblance to the relaxed half-hour of television that the audience experienced at home. Standing on concrete for extended periods is a specific kind of physical punishment that tradespeople who have done it for decades understand in a way that people who work at desks genuinely cannot. It compresses the joints differently. It creates a cumulative fatigue that does not respond to a good night's sleep the way ordinary tiredness does. It is the kind of wear that builds slowly and arrives all at once. The production demands of the new Yankee Workshop were also categorically different from his work on This Old House in terms of personal output. On This Old House, Norm was one member of a team working on a renovation project, contributing his specific expertise and working alongside other professionals. On the new Yankee Workshop, the entire physical and creative burden of every episode was his. He was the one designing the project, selecting the wood, making every cut, building every joint, finishing every surface, and then doing it again for the camera in a way that clearly demonstrated the process and was educational. The difference between the two workloads was the difference between being a member of an ensemble and being the entire production. Norm later confirmed publicly that the entire run of the show had been funded entirely through underwriting and that it could have continued financially, meaning the end was not a budget decision, a ratings decision, or something WGBH or Russell pushed him toward. He said he had accomplished everything he set out to do on the show and wanted to spend more time with his family. That statement is true and also incomplete, as most dignified exits from difficult situations are. He had accomplished everything he wanted to accomplish, and he had also reached the point where continuing to accomplish it at the same physical cost was no longer something he was willing to ask of himself. His father, who had taught him everything about carpentry from the age of 9, had died in 1995, halfway through the show's run. The man who had shaped Norm Abram's entire relationship with wood and tools and the physical knowledge of building things by hand was gone, while the show was still going. His father had told him once not to rush, that you would get the rewards in the end if you were patient with the work. Norm Abram spent 20 years doing exactly that on camera, and then he decided that the patience he had shown toward the work could also be shown toward himself. He was done. The shop would close, and there was not going to be anyone else standing at that table saw. But what exactly made Norm so special? Why nobody could replace him, and nobody tried? The specific reasoning that Russell gave for not attempting to find a successor to Norm is worth examining more carefully than the brief summary it usually gets, because it contains a genuine insight about what made the new Yankee Workshop work in the first place, and why that particular combination of person and format was essentially impossible to reproduce. When Russell said that comparisons between Norm and any successor would be inevitable, he was not merely referring to the audience's loyalty to a familiar face. He was talking about something more fundamental: the fact that Norm Abram's authority on screen was not a television persona that could be transferred to a more skilled performer. It was the direct product of decades of actual expertise in the actual trade being demonstrated. When Norm explained why he was making a particular cut in a particular way, the explanation carried weight, not because he had rehearsed it, but because he had made that cut and hundreds of cuts, like it thousands of times, across a professional life that began before most of his audience had graduated from high school. Woodworking enthusiasts and craftspeople who regularly watched the show and knew the field well consistently described Norm as someone easy to learn from, precisely because his expertise was so deep that he could afford to slow down and explain the reasoning behind each decision, rather than just demonstrate the outcome. That is a specific kind of teaching that only works when the teacher is genuinely not worried about demonstrating mastery, because the mastery is so established that it does not need to be performed. Any host brought in to replace Norm would have faced the double burden of proving both their competence and their right to occupy a space associated with one person's expertise for 20 years. And Russell correctly read that as an unwinnable situation. The show's final season, Season 21, proved the honesty with which Norm and Russell approached the ending. Rather than producing new content for a final season, they structured it as a retrospective, with each episode rebroadcasting a project from either Season 9 or 10, with a newly recorded introduction from Norm providing the framing. The season had roughly twice as many episodes as any previous season. The last thing audiences watched Norm Abram make was something they had already seen him make years earlier, introduced by a man who had clearly made peace with the fact that the work was done. In his own remarks at the time of the announcement, Norm said they had had a great run, built challenging projects, met wonderful woodworkers, and received loyal support from millions of viewers. Not sentimental, not elaborate. Exactly the kind of statement the man himself would make. Accurate, complete, and comfortable with the quietness of it. He kept working on this old house after the workshop ended, remaining on the program until his full retirement in October 2022, after 43 years. The retirement from this old house was marked by a one-hour special called The House That Norm Built, which aired on his 73rd birthday, surveying his full career with the program that had launched everything. By that point, the quiet carpenter whom Russell Marash had hired to build a small barn in 1979 because of the size of his scrap pile, had spent more than 4 decades teaching Americans how to build the places they lived in and the furniture they sat on. The real reason the new Yankee Workshop ending is not complicated and does not require any drama to explain. A man who had been doing the hardest, most physical, most demanding version of his work for the cameras for 20 years reached the age of nearly 60, looked at what his body was telling him, looked at the family he had been spending 40 to 60-hour production weeks away from, and made a straightforward decision that a carpenter who has been building things long enough to know the difference between a project worth continuing and one that is finished would recognize immediately. He was totally done. The workshop was complete, and the thing he had built there a generation of woodworkers who learned their craft by watching a quiet man in a plaid shirt do it with precision and patience every week for 21 years, was not going anywhere regardless of whether the barn door was open or closed. Do you think the new Yankee Workshop could work today on YouTube or streaming services? Or was it specifically built for the PBS era in which it aired? And which project that Norm Abram built on the show do you think best represents everything the show was at its very best? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.